Hi everyone and welcome to Mod 14 of Unit 3. So today we're going to talk about behavior genetics and really how the whole nature versus nurture debate is playing out in psychology. So here are the goals for you with this module. These are the things that you should be able to do once we have completed this video and the activities in class. And then here are the vocab. Pause and write them down if you need to. All right, so when we're looking at the individual, because in psychology we're looking at the individual, we, psychologists and specifically behavior geneticists, are trying to understand the power and the limits of genetic and environmental influences on our behavior. So genetic being our nature, what we are given through nature, and then what has shaped us in the environment, the way we have been nurtured through our environment. So how they do this is they look at the differences amongst human beings, amongst organisms in general, and they pry out whether this is something that must be genetic or it must be nurture, or, and often, sometimes both. So there are some universal truths. We're actually a lot more similar than we are different in many ways. And that's true for not just us, but we also share a lot of similarities with other species. So for example, both gorillas and humans fear strangers around the same age, so around 8 months, and all adults prefer company of those we agree with. So universally across the globe, those things are universal. A smile, a frown, those are universal symbols. So those are just a couple of examples of how we all share so many things in common. But what we're going to look at, for what behavioral geneticists are going to look at, is the differences. And the differences will help us tell if something is genetic or if something is more environmental. So that is our nature versus nurture debate. So a little bit on nature. So these vocab sets right here, chromosomes, DNA, and genes, these are things that I'm sure you have already learned about, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. They are vocab, so you do need to know them. If you think of, so our genes are basically what make us who we are genetically, right? They are our inherited genes. So they make up the chromosome segments of DNA, and then the chromosomes are these thread-like structures made of DNA. So the DNA is within the chromosomes, and we have 23 chromosomes from each parent, 46 chromosomes in total to create the chain. And then genome is also a vocab word, so the complete instructions basically for making us, that is our genome. So the human genome, for example, that's like the blueprint for how to make a human. It's our design. So nurture, so this we said is our environment. So it's every external influence. So this could be your family, your community, your school, your friends, your siblings, any little experience that you have had. All of those things, you can't really separate those things, right? Because we build and we learn from different experiences, and different things shape us, our culture, our values, our society, the time period we live in, everything, right? So basically genes give us one thing, but it doesn't mean that everything we've been given genetically is going to be expressed. So some things will be expressed and some things won't. And this is a word, and I would write this word down. This is predisposed. It's not a vocab word here, but it comes up throughout. It's an important word. If it's something you're not familiar with, You should write that word down. So predisposed is this idea that we are given basically that blueprint of genes. So maybe, for example, something like depression runs in your family. That doesn't mean that you will have depression. However, you could have a higher, or you do have a higher predisposition to having depression. However, depression is not genetics alone. It is nature and nurture. So you have the genetic predisposition and you have the environmental stressors that might bring that out. And those two things combined can cause you to be at high risk for depression. So using science, we can actually look at people who are high risk. If you think about how we've done this in many ways with medical issues, right? In cancer, you can, people are tested more frequently or watched more closely because they are high risk. Well, the same thing can be true of mental health. So how do we study nature versus nurture? So how do we tease out the nature and nurture, since we are one, we are our experiences, we are our genes, and you can't just unravel that. There are too many confounding variables, right? So we need to use twin and adoption studies. So when we're talking about twin studies, we're either going to be talking about identical twins, or sometimes both, identical twins or fraternal twins. I know you're familiar with those words. So identical twins, the technical term is monozygotic. Mono meaning one, right? So if you look at the diagram here, meaning it's coming from one egg, and the egg splits, and there are two genetically identical. Their DNA is the same, identical. That's a monozygotic, identical twins. Dizygotic, the woman releases two eggs and both eggs are fertilized. So the difference here is that essentially fraternal twins, they share a womb, but they are just as similar and no more similar than any other sibling, except for the fact that they shared the womb at the same time. So anything they might have been exposed to in the womb, they experienced that together. But they are genetically no more similar than any other siblings who are not twins. So molecular genetics. So this is where we get into this kind of sci-fi, philosophical type discussions that you might have in some of your science religion classes and morality classes. So molecular genetics seeks to identify the specific genes connected to various traits. And a lot of times, certain behaviors, certain things, for example, they just came out with this huge study on sexual orientation, and they found that there's not one gene. There are many genes that are linked. So we're very complex. It's often not one specific gene. It's often many, or teams of genes, they say. So they look at those specific genes and see if they can connect them to traits. So another thing they could look at perhaps is alcoholism and find the specific genes for that, or male pattern baldness, anything. They can look for the specific markers. So again, we're using adoptions, identical twins, and fraternal twins for these studies. Twins can also be reared apart, which sounds uncommon. It is fairly uncommon, but it does happen more than you might think, and especially in the past in the United States. So this is a big word. It's hard to say. I hate saying it. Hereditability. So hereditability is the degree to which differences amongst people are attributable to genes. So the differences amongst people are attributable to genes. So that does not mean how much we differ within ourselves. Basically, it's trying to tease out nature versus nurture, and it's among people, and I have that bolded and underlined because you cannot tease that out within one individual, right? You can't separate those things within me and say, why do I have that trait? Is that completely nurture? Is it completely nature? Unless it's something that we already know is like completely genetic, right? Or environmental. So we can't separate those things. So we measure by looking at the human species and using twin studies and adoption studies. That's just what I just said. So if you were looking at something and it said the hereditability was 0.4, this means that 40% of the individual differences we observe in that trait are due to genetic differences. One of the most hereditable traits is our personality or shyness. I believe that's 0.6, so 60%. And that means amongst people, not in you specifically or anyone specifically, but amongst humans, that is 60% due to our genetics. So our genes and our environment interact. So again, think of predisposition. There's an interplay here between these things. This interact is a vocab word. It's the interplay of when one thing, so environment, plays on genes, or genes play on the environment, right? You tend to be more shy, which is a more genetic trait. And so you tend to hang out with these types of people who are interested in these types of things. And all of that kind of connects and kind of intertwines to set you on a certain path. Some things are, the same in every environment, like growing two eyes in utero happens the same way to all of us. Other traits are only expressed due to environment. So my example here is like your feet. You're only going to get toughened and calloused feet if you're outside barefoot all the time walking around, right? So certain things go certain ways. So epigenetics. So epigenetics is the study of environmental influences on genetic expression. So the study of environmental influences on genetic expression. So they're looking at what turns those genes on or off. What makes those things get expressed? So sometimes it's a factor like drugs or the foods that we eat or our lifestyle, our stress levels. All of those things can affect our epigenetic molecules. They can change our biology. Isn't that crazy? So how we experience our experiences in the world actually leave a fingerprint on our brains and on our molecules, and they change us. All right, so our takeaways. So heredity deals the cards, environment plays the hand. So nature gives us one thing, and the environment plays on that, and the two interact with each other. You should know the difference between a behavior geneticist and a molecular geneticist. You should understand how we study nature versus nurture. What do we use? Who do we use? And you should understand the word hereditability. I guarantee you that word will come up. So most things are both nature and nurture. All right, I hope you found this video helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in class